And then the third piece is individual pathways. So this is where a lot of that personalized learning piece comes in, is learners are goal setting. They're working through some of the focus area pieces, which is the more content driven part. Some of that at their own pace.
When I talk to people about it, I say like the old school study hall. It's basically what that was. So in the past, when I had a study hall, there'd be a group of kids in the back, not really doing a whole lot, quite possibly a behavior issue. There'd be a group up here, like getting work done because they didn't want to do anything after school. It was kind of like an all over the board. I wasn't really sure who was supposed to work on what, or like what, maybe they weren't doing the right thing. This year it looked very different. So that study hall or personalized learning time was extremely focused. Everybody knew exactly what to do. If somebody was a little bit off task, because let's face it, they're sixth graders, I was able to look at their platform and help them determine what their next steps would be. And so while they got going and working, we then were, again, pulling small groups working together. So anybody who didn't pass theme, maybe Mr. Caldesell would be doing a group, or anybody who needed help on, I'm drawing a blank on
parts of speech.
Thank you. So we would take turns kind of watching each other's personal PLT groups while other people did groups, learning groups. So,
and that was a time when all of us did mentoring. So they weren't in a class the same per se, but that was the time when you could say, hey, can I interrupt you? And I know I did that. That was when I looked in on my friends.
so I think that's okay. So I think in the past, the homework was getting done if you were intrinsically motivated to do homework, but otherwise it didn't really mean a lot. This platform has this blue line, which was a little bit more of an extrinsic motivator to get students to get going on the skills that they needed to use then on the projects in the class the next day.
One of the shifts is the homework itself changed then because the platform allows some choice that Andy talked about, and the focus areas are the content learning that support the projects, but the completion of the focus areas is very much driven by the students. And you guys can tell more about that.
I'll talk specifically about math. So my students had a variety of focus areas for math that went along with the projects that we were doing in class. So if, for example, we were talking about coordinate geometry in class as a project, they would be working on a focus area that revolved around the coordinate grid, for example. So they would be working on the skill independently at their own pace and choosing different resources to look at to help with their learning in that area. And then in class, we would be reinforcing that. I would be doing some lessons on the same ideas, but probably not spending as much time as I had in the past on teaching the lesson of how do you plot a 3, 2, how do you plot that point. The students were doing a lot of that independent learning on the focus area at the same time that I would teach a mini lesson about it, but then be able to advance and go deeper with that idea. And I really saw a lot of growth with my students in taking the ownership of their work and taking homework, if you will, seriously. Their homework wasn't me saying, you need to go home tonight and you need to do these 10 problems and bring it back tomorrow. They were, and that was true across the board for every class. They were told to go home and work on what they needed to work on, and they had to make some choices in that area. So they may have chosen to work on the math that day, but also a little bit of literacy. They may choose the next day to work on social studies and a little bit of literacy, but they were ready to go ahead with the math, and maybe they had done that at school and not needed to do that at home that night. And they then chose which resources they needed based on their need. Not every kid did the same resources. They would go into the platform, look what was available to them, and make a decision based on what they needed and go through a resource. And for math, they would maybe be doing some problems to see if they did understand the concept, or maybe watching a video to help them learn what they were going to need to know to then do the practice.
So let's think about how much space they each take up on my screen. And since we're doing everything in terms of meters, since all of the dimensions are in meters, I'm going to measure the area in terms of square meters.
Once they had gotten through their resources and felt like they did understand that information, they would take an assessment to see if they indeed did get all of it that they knew. And the nice part about that piece, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, is that homework piece was assessed in an assessment, but I also assessed it on my own during my project time. So I was getting 2 pieces of data from my students about whether or not they understood and learned a concept, which was a bit different than in the past. Usually there was just a final test at the end, and I still had a final written test at the end, but I had this piece of the skill work that they needed to know before they took the test as well. So those 2 pieces gave us more information than we had had in the past. And their homework then was really for these kiddos, not just a task that I told them to do, but something that they owned and they needed to do to understand what was going on in class, as well as this assessment they were going to do on their own. So I saw more kids participating in doing the homework and definitely using it as a tool to learn instead of a checklist of something Mrs. Henry said I have to do, and she said to do these. They were really owning that piece.
I'm going to jump in here. They take that content assessment. There's usually more than one learning target. There's like 2 or 3 learning targets. And after they take that content assessment, they get a report and it actually tells them which learning target do they still need to work on. And so before they can take it again, because they do have to pass it finally, so before they take it again, they know what objective to go in to learn. They don't have to go back and try to learn everything. It just says, hey, you just need to know about this one thing. They go back, pick some resources out, and then they retake this, and we look, okay, you did the work, now you think you got the objective number 2, you don't understand it? Yeah, and we take it. So it really tells, not every kid had to do the same thing to retake a content assessment. It was based on what the child did the first time around, which I thought was kind of neat for the kids. And some kids will come up, hey, Mr. Kreitz, I didn't pass this one, but I need to know this, and I'm going to do these 3 resources. They're already thinking in their head what they have to do to pass it. And so that's just something that I saw for the first time, kids actually thinking about what they have to do to pass this content assessment.
Or when they ask us questions, it's not, I didn't pass a test. It's, I didn't pass this objective. Their questions are much more pointed than they were in the past because they can narrow down their weakness, right? And to jump, piggyback off what Courtney was talking about, so in literacy, one of our focus areas was theme. And so part of the choice, the personalization, early in the school year, we were working on stories and storyboards, and I was talking a lot about theme. The project. So the project in class, we were talking about theme. In the timeline, it was down the road a little bit. And so a student said to me, hey, we're talking about theme. Can I do that now? Well, of course. So because we were talking about it, she wanted to learn more about it. So she jumped and did that. Traditionally, that would never be a possibility, right? She'd have to wait for me to turn the page to get to that theme area where she chose, she was investing, like, I need to learn this. So that's what she was studying during her personalized learning time.
One of the things that I really took away from my students this year when it came to the homework was the time management piece that they learned, which is a life skill. And they had to make decisions. They had, a couple weeks to get some of these focus areas done, and they had to choose. Okay, I have soccer tonight, so that means, maybe I need to work on social studies and this is the resource I need, or I'm going to work on math because I just can't think of social studies and read those passages, but I can do the math because it's a little bit more black and white or whatever. But my daughter came home and she's 28, and I was on the computer and she was asking me about, well, what is Summit? Can you tell me a little bit more about it? And I was just like, I was just checking because there's a due date and the blue line moves and the kids get choice and I was explaining what these people were just explaining about it. And she was like, that's genius. I wish I would have had that as an 11 and 12-year-old because I spent the first 2 years of college trying to figure out time management because all my teachers were giving me things to do at the same time and I was working and trying to figure that all out. And she's like, those kids are so darn lucky that they have this opportunity now in their life and don't have to wait until they're 18 to kind of figure that out. And I said, well, that's funny, because we always had assignments that they had like weeks out. And she goes, yeah, but it's different when it's every night. You have to make that decision, and you have to figure out, like, okay, I know I have this commitment for work, or I have this going on. And she said, that was a lot of my tears my first couple of years in college. And she's like, these kids are just so lucky. And I was like, yeah, they kind of are, aren't they?